Hello and welcome to Dice and Demons. I'm Emma, and in this video I'm going to show you how I paint my, I think my biggest model to date, which is really cool. I mean, big dinos, who doesn't love them, right? So I start off with a model that's been primed using white scars, and then I grab my trusty contrast paints. I love contrast paints, and especially for such a big project, it's just really nice to have something that'll cover in one go. So the bluish paint I'm using is Cruxical Scales. It's sort of a nice turquoise bluish color, and the purple paint is Loction Purple. It's one of those, along with Cruxical Scales, one of those newer contrast paints, and I'm both using these because, well, I like the colors, but also just because I wanted to have an excuse to use them and get to know them a little bit. And you can see I'm sort of trying to blend the two where they meet. And it's just a really quick wet blend. There is nothing fancy about it or anything. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't kind of a sharp line between the two. This was quite daunting, actually, putting a pencil, a brush with color on this model. It's just like a huge project, and I was kind of afraid to mess it up, and I didn't really know where I wanted to go with the colors. So I just grabbed two colors I liked and then sort of went from there, really. Then once I had decided that I really like the Cruxical Scales, I wanted to use that both on the sort of the scales and also on the more fleshier bits, sort of the underside here of the neck. And so I used the Cruxical Scales, but also knew I wanted to blend it with something because I thought it would be too much if it was just this in one go. Especially on such a large model, I think it's relatively important to try and to think about sort of tones and hues to make sure that it's just not one massive blob of color. Particularly on an organic model such as this. On a tank, of course, you can get away with it. It makes sense, but like this is a big beastie, so I wanted color variation. And so I mixed the Cruxical Scales here, as you can see, with Athematic Blue. The Athematic Blue is a little bit more vibrant than it shows up here on the camera. I'm having a little bit of trouble. I mean, I'm filming this on a phone because, I mean, I'm not a rich person and I prefer to spend my money on models if I have any, and not on fancy camera equipment that I don't know how to use anyway. So, as the hues doesn't show up exactly the way they are, but I think you get the general idea anyway. And as you can see again here, this is why I love contrast paints. They just bring out a lot of detail without you actually having to do a lot of work for it. Then I decided, because I had purple and I had a darker turquoise and a lighter turquoise, I might as well go with something that did not match at all, which was this very, very bright green. This is also contrast paint, and it's called Striking Scorpion, and it's just as vibrant as it looks here on the video. It's one of the new contrast paints. I think I'm mostly using the newer contrast paints in this video, and you can tell it doesn't really look it doesn't give that older contrasty feel. It's relatively flat when you sort of look at how many details there actually are on those feathers. But yeah, I still like it. It's a cool color. The orange I'm using here is called Magmadroth Flame, and it also ends up with a pretty flat finish. Nothing. It doesn't really help you a lot when it comes to actually giving you contrasts in your painting scheme. But what I do really like about it, and the reason I'm using it, is that it will give a nice, relatively even coat in one go. And I'm sort of a lazy painter, so instead of me having to do 2 or 3 thin coats of sort of regular paint, I am just using these because then I can get to the stuff that I really think is fun. And here I don't have a finished plan or anything when I start painting like this. I just sort of make it up as I go along, and if I really, really end up hating what I'm doing, I will probably strip the model and redo it. That did not happen on this model, but I promise you it has happened on many other projects. So then when I was done with the orange, I sort of, again, want to make sure that the feathers did not look like one big blob of color, which is also why I did a couple of green ones on the cheek of the dino. I then went in with a red contrast paint, and this one is called Bal Red, and it's a very nice vibrant red color, which also does not really work as a contrast paint a lot. It just sort of, yeah, gives a nice bright red color in one go. So the reason I decided I wanted to use these three colors was just that I wanted something that really stood out against the skin, because I think the whole dino is cool, but what's really cool is, I think, to me, is the fact that the dino has feathers, and so I wanted to spend most of my energy and time on making the feathers stand out. Which is why I went on to this next step, which was doing a dark line around each and every feather. I cannot tell you how many times during this process I regretted that decision, because that was really, really tedious. Some people suggested, I posted about this like on Instagram a while back, and people said I should have tried with perhaps oil washes and stuff. I haven't tried that yet, but the thing with washes is that I'm always afraid to lose the vibrancy of the underlying colors, and I don't want to do that. So in the end, I just went for a black line around each and every feather. It took hours. Yeah. Then I went over the red feathers, and I did a highlight of those using Radar Red, which is a fluorescent paint from Huge Miniatures. And on the smaller feathers here, as you can see, I just do more or less one solid coat of paint. But on the bigger ones, I try to make sure only to do sort of an edge highlight, so you get a darker tone in the middle of the feathers. Some of the feathers are actually pretty big because this is a huge model, and so I want to make sure you have some color variation also on the individual feathers. Then I grab another paint from Huge Miniatures. This is called Laser Orange, and I did an edge highlight of every single orange feather using this paint. This is, at least as time consuming as doing the black outline, but somehow it is just way more gratifying and way more fun to me. I'm a strange kind of person. I love edge highlighting. There's just such a sense of satisfaction somehow. Especially when you're using very bright colors, you can just see the miniature, the whole look and feel of the miniature just transforms right under your eyes and, under your brush. It's just, I don't know. It's a lovely feeling. I love doing stuff like this. So I did not regret that decision. Then for the green feathers, I used another paint from Huge Miniatures. This one is called Quantum Green, and it's also a very nice, vibrant green color. And I tried to do the same here as I did on the red and orange feathers. The only thing is that perhaps the scorpion, like the striking scorpion green, the contrast paint was actually a little bit too light, because the highlights did not show up as clearly here as they did on the red and orange parts. At this point, however, I still liked the look. There wasn't anything like wrong with it or anything. It's just that it wasn't quite as striking as it perhaps could have been if I had mixed in some sort of darker tone with the striking scorpion before I put it on the mini. And then on the very edge of each feather, I put a little bit of Starfire Yellow, also a fluorescent paint from Huge Miniatures, and I think that really helped them stand out. So I was happy I went to the trouble of doing that last edge highlight on the green. While I was already working with the Starfire Yellow, I thought I might as well go back over the orange feathers as well and give them a little bit of that as well. Then I went back to the red feathers and I highlighted them with a bit of laser orange, the first layer of highlight that I put on the orange feathers. And I did as you can see here, more or less only on the sort of tip of each feather, and trying to be a little bit more careful with it, because I wanted to make sure that you could actually tell the difference between the red feathers and the orange feathers. So I wouldn't want to just plaster the whole thing in in orange paint. At the same time, I really love the orange. It's very, very vibrant, which is not very easy to see here on the video, but it really is. And so it's just one of my favorite paints, especially again, as I said, I love doing edge highlights. So, and then with a very bright orange, that's just, I mean, yeah, I just love that. And then for the very edge of the feathers, I just touch them with a tiny bit of the Starfire yellow, just to really make them pop. And I think, for me at least, the red feathers was the most fun to do, just because they are the ones where you can have the biggest difference in the variation of the color from the darker parts of the red all the way through to a very vibrant fluorescent paint of yellow. Then, because I decided that I hadn't punished myself enough with all the black lines, I grabbed another contrast paint. This one was Gorgon Safari, which is a nice rich brown color, and then I just sort of tried to paint in like a feather design, while taking especially care to hit the middle of each feather and then sort of strands outwards from there. It was a little bit time consuming, but not as bad as the black outline, and I think it really helped sell the idea that they were feathers and not scales. Then for the skin, I grabbed Pterodon Turquoise, which is also a contrast paint, and I sort of painted up some of the shadows to make them a little bit darker. I used Pterodon Turquoise and not black because I wanted the black only to be on the feathers, because as I said, I wanted those to be sort of what really stands out on this particular model. And so those I wanted to be like have the really darkest shadows, and then the Pterodon Turquoise would work well for the skin. Then, because I tried to be a little bit lazy, I thought I could just do a quick dry brush on the skin and it would pick up the scales, and I could more or less call it, well, not done exactly, but almost. I didn't really like it. I mean, I'm not great at dry brushing. I think I've heard there's a trick to it that makes it look a little bit less dusty, but I do not know that trick. And yeah, I usually end up not liking it when I do dry brushing, and particularly not on an organic model. Again, if dry brushing on a piece of terrain or a stone or something, that's one thing. Dry brushing on a model such as this, it just doesn't really work well for me. So yeah, I don't. But I tried. It was just such a big model, and it had taken a long time. But then I realized it did not work, and so I went back to my my brush and I grabbed that, and then I decided to highlight more or less each individual scale, not the very smallest ones, but almost all of them. And I did this with a mixture of a color called Blasted Blue from Huge Miniatures mixed with a bit of white. And I could tell when I was doing this that this was going to take ages, and I mean, the feathers were always the part of the model that really stood out to me and were, a really fun challenge. And this just seemed very, very tedious. But as I said, I did not like the dry brush, and so I didn't know what else to do. But then I had an idea, and I grabbed one of my sculpting tools, which, as you can see, has a sort of ball-like end to it. And I just touched that to the model, a bit of paint on it, and then onto the model, and I think it really does a very believable job of painting scales. And it was much quicker and much easier, and actually also a lot more consistent than painting it with a brush, so that was excellent. Then for the smaller scales, I took another sculpting tool, and this is, you can see it's very dirty. That's because it's the one I usually use for getting old paint out of paint pots and stuff. But it worked really, really well. And then for the purple scales, I decided to highlight them with a color called Pulse Wave Pink. And I could also have highlighted them with a lighter purple color, but I find that light purple often looks... it's very pastel somehow, whereas highlighting purple with pink looks nice and vibrant and bright, which I usually prefer that look, and sometimes purple can also work really well. But for this model, I thought for the eyes and the mouth also to stand out amidst all of those very, very bright feathers, I needed something that could sort of stand on its own a little bit, and I think that pink was the better choice for that. And as I said, I didn't have any real idea of what I wanted to do when I started painting it, what the color scheme would be. So it came sort of a surprise to me that it ended up looking like this. But I quite like it. And then for the last layer of highlight here on the purple pink part, I used a color called Cyber Pink. And I ended up also touching it just the edge of the scales, of the pink scales, the purple scales, with a bit of white. But yeah, here you can see the finished model, and it was, as I said, tedious to paint the black outline on the feathers and stuff, but I'm actually pretty proud of this model. It was a huge undertaking, and as I said, it was quite daunting just to get started with it, but it was very fun, and now I have this great big feathered dino on my table, and it also looks great if you bring it to a rave party, because it glows under a UV light like most of my models do. So yeah, it was really fun. You'll also notice that the sort of equipment he's got on his back, like, I don't know, it's supposed to be some sort of riding platform if you want to put an orc or something on top of it. I decided to paint that with quite neutral tones, so like different variations of gray and brown, and just because I thought using even more bright colors would just perhaps make it a little bit more confusing to look at than it already is. And as I said, I really want especially the feathers to be what stands out, and then I want the area surrounding the eyes, the nose, the mouth also to be what catches your eye, and then the feet perhaps as well a little bit, just to make it easier to read the model somehow. So that's why I went with a relatively neutral bluish turquoise tone for the most of the body, and just highlighted that with brighter, like lighter versions of blue and white, and then went with the very neutral colors for the stuff that's not actually the dino, but like riding gear or something. So yeah, that's what that's at, and I think I'm actually very happy with it, and I'm also quite proud of it because it was a big project, and it was a little bit tricky to paint because it was so big. So I ended up sort of scraping it along the edge of the table and stuff, and peeling off paint and all sorts of things, just because it was really, really big. But that was a little bit, tricky while painting, but very, very fun now that it's all done. So yeah, again, this was sent to me by someone who has been watching this channel and following along, just as a present, really, so that I could try something else besides painting Warhammer models, and I am very grateful. It was such a fun project, so thank you so much. So yeah, do you have any questions or comments? You are, of course, more than welcome to leave them in the comment section below. And you can also follow me as Dice and Demons on Twitter and Instagram. And yeah, let me know what you think about this. Let me know if you have other ideas for projects you would like to see me paint in the future. I'm always open for suggestions, definitely. So thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye!